Liberty Nation. Truth is making a comeback.
Welcome back to the LibertyNation.com Midweek Roundtable. This is Scott D. Cosenza, Liberty Nation Legal Affairs Editor, and I'm joined today by Sarah Cowgill, who is our national correspondent, Mark Angelides, who is managing editor, and Graham J. Noble, who is our political correspondent, I guess. Welcome, one and all.
Hi, Scott.
Okay, well, we don't have one particular topic that we're going to discuss today. We've got a bit of a dog's lunch. I did want to, before we maybe put it to bed forever, or maybe put it to bed for a little while anyway, just wrap up with some talk about the Kavanaugh, l'affaire de Kavanaugh, I suppose at this point we can call it. Judge Kavanaugh has taken his seat on the bench. Reporting indicates that there were no disruptions in the Supreme Court chamber like there had been in the Senate. And I just wanted kind of a sense of where you think things are going to go, the legacy of Kavanaugh, both in some sort of short-term political effects and perhaps long-term for the body politic, and that's about it. Short and sweet. Sarah, would you weigh in for us, please?
Yeah, short term, it's a done deal. He's going to fade off just like DACA did, just like every other thing they come up with, that the left comes up with. He's going to just go to work and do his thing. Nobody's going to keep an eye on him. They're looking for something else that they can derail the Trump train. That's all they're doing is right before midterms. He's not even going to factor in the news in the next couple of days. And long term, I think he's just going to hunker down and do what he does. And only his legacy will tell. We don't know what kind of a Supreme Court justice he's going to be until he is one.
Okay, Graham, I want to hear from you next as our political correspondent. What do you see happening in the near term and then in the long term?
Well, in the near term, I see a lot of amazement now that Associate Justice Kavanaugh is on the court. There's going to be a lot of amazement in about a week or two when people realize that corpses are not piling up in the streets and that women and gays and black people are not being rounded up and put into concentration camps.
They maybe haven't gotten to your neighborhood yet, Graham, but I see them
maybe with the hurricane and everything, maybe
right.
they just haven't, the stormtroopers haven't arrived yet.
Right.
But anyway, I think after the initial shock is over, the world continues to turn. Basically, we're just going to hear constant cries of this Supreme Court is illegitimate. This justice is illegitimate. None of their decisions, in brackets, in parentheses, if they don't go our way, none of those decisions are legitimate. And I guess then they'll have to take these Supreme Court cases to the Supreme Court to challenge them. I don't know.
Sarah, did you want to jump in there?
He was duly put into the Supreme Court. That's ridiculous if they could call it illegitimate. They can't call it illegitimate.
That's absolutely one of the major fronts in their anti-Kavanaugh battle post-confirmation is to say he's a justice with an asterisk next to his name and that the Supreme Court decisions are illegitimate.
I mean, they tried that with Trump. That didn't work. Come on. I mean, this is ridiculous from the left. It's ridiculous. They have to move on.
Are you suggesting the left is ridiculous?
I am.
There's talk of impeaching Kavanaugh. If Democrats get the majority of the House of Representatives, they'll be able to control committees and issue subpoenas, and they will. I mean, it seems like Gerald Nadler and some other dedicated lefty Democrats are devoted to the idea that they will be able to make a great deal of hay out of Kavanaugh's nomination after the election if they're sufficiently successful.
Good luck with that. I mean, they haven't found anything. This is not an asterisk. This is a duly sworn in person on the court. This is absolutely ridiculous, stupid. And if they want to bury themselves for the next 2 years and never see the light of day, go ahead, bring it on, Democrats. Because you know what? Their conservatives are going to show up at midterms. This is ridiculous. It's got everybody fired up. Everybody.
Well, that is so. Let's. I want to hear about from the view from afar on this, Kavanaugh, and then I want to return briefly to that question about whether conservatives will show up or liberals will show up in greater numbers in November because of this. Mark, what do you see from across the pond?
Well, short term, it's great for the media cycle. It gives them something to do. The protesters who are out there, it gives them something to do, keeps them out of the workforce, which is, great, gives real people a chance for a job. But long term, it really doesn't matter what they do, because it wasn't the president who made Brett Kavanaugh a justice, as far as I can tell. It was the Senate, whose role of advise and consent, their actual powers, made him a justice. Is that right? Have I got this wrong?
It's both. Yeah. Without the president's signature,
he has to nominate.
He doesn't become, or nomination, he doesn't become a justice. And without the Senate's yes vote, then he doesn't become a justice. So it's a dual.
So while there's still a Republican president in the White House, it doesn't really matter what they try and do in terms of impeaching Kavanaugh or trying to get the subpoenas through the House of Representatives, because to create a different justice, a new justice, associate justice, would still require a presidential signature, and it would still require to get through the Senate.
About whether they would be willing to go ahead just in spite of that. I think that if we see a Democrat House with Speaker Pelosi or another, and I imagine the other would be more radical rather than less, that we will see an attempt to derail Kavanaugh, or at least hobble him, or the administration as they respond to the subpoena requests.
But then it would still have to go through the next person on the list would still be put forward by the standing president, which would still have to go before the Senate, which is still a Republican Senate. That
all that delay and distraction would be considered a major victory. I mean, you see it as just like what's the point to get to another Trump appointee? Well, the point is, by kicking the can further down the road, you get to a point where maybe it's not a Trump appointee. Maybe their dream of impeachment actually comes true, and you get to frustrate his attempt to get that justice on the court.
Okay.
One final thought is that a longer term strategy of the left is to negate the conservative, apparent conservative dominance on the Supreme Court now, with Kavanaugh being there, obviously Gorsuch, and now Kavanaugh, and almost certainly at least one more Trump Supreme Court nominee before he's out of the White House. The left's actual long-term goal to negate that is to expand the Supreme Court. Now, whether they'll ever manage to do that or not, but believe me, that is their ultimate plan: is to actually add 2 more justices to the Supreme Court.
Well, Graham, oddly enough, Mark and I spoke about that earlier in an LNTV that we did, focusing on Michael Avenatti and his sort of where things are with him. And so let's just, for a very brief, because we did do that segment on Avenatti solely. Do you think court packing is a real potential here? It seemed like it was a real outlier when I first heard Avenatti talk about it in response to Merrick Garland. But now, as I mentioned in the LNTV, there's a Washington Post story, a big story about it, and it seems to be kind of inching its way from the very fringes towards the outer rings of the center. Anyway, do you have any? Well, I'll ask Sarah. Actually, Sarah, you have been sort of traveling in a way. Has that kind of made its way into your consciousness, this talk of the court packing?
Well, yeah, and in fact, I was at a memorial tournament for a fallen classmate, random, and you guys can read about that in my column, but it was all about the Supreme Court. People were sitting around on their phones listening on Saturday to what was happening with Kavanaugh, and cheers just erupted. And then a good friend that I've known for almost 50 years says, "Are they going to pack the court? Is that what Avenatti's up to?" And, I hadn't thought of it as anything even legitimate. And the fact that they can do that, I mean, if they can do that, that would be, and nobody understood that. Nobody at the tables really understood that. They said, well, how can they do that? Can they do that? And so then, which prompted my message to you as a constitutional lawyer, how the heck do you get that done? That is not something that's on the radar out here. Not at all.
Well, they almost assuredly will have to win some more races to do any of their proposed changes. So let's talk briefly, if we may, then about where we see, it seems like the left, we can separate out Democrats and the left, sort of mom and pop Democrat, Main Street, I don't think are the same ones that are necessarily wailing about Kavanaugh or talking about court packing. That seems to be a different universe. Are either of those universes going to come out in November for Democrat congressional candidates in a way that they wouldn't have prior to the Kavanaugh affair that's going to move the needle for Democrats in a big way? I'll ask Graham first.
Well, I kind of think on the left side of things, in terms of the midterm elections, I almost think that the kind of the Democrat Party is going in two directions at once, or at least the Democratic voting base is going in two directions at once. I think it's interesting, Scott, you mentioned that distinction between your average American who just happens to vote Democrat, and then these radical leftists, progressive socialists, whatever you want to call them. I think they are two distinct groups now. And I actually think the Kavanaugh thing, as well as, the way the economy is going and all the rest of it, is going to lead kind of ordinary, for want of a better term, mainstream Democrats to be either less enthusiastic in this midterms, or even perhaps even a few of them vote for Republicans. And on the other hand, I think the radical left is going to be far more energized to come out and vote. But of course, there are a lot less of them. So maybe that's not such a problem for the Republicans.
No, I totally agree with Graham on that. I think that the normal thinking Democrats, if there is such a thing, I think they're embarrassed, and they might sit this one out. They don't want to be associated with that silly crap on the alt left that they're clawing at the Supreme Court doors and wailing in the street. They don't want that. They just want a good hard fight, and then we go back to working together as Americans. They don't want this. Conservatives don't want this.
Republican leaders have said that this has animated their base. The idea being that you want more of this kind of fight for future nominations and battles. This is what this is the Trump sort of dividend, right? This is why we, especially those who may be much more socially or much more personally conservative, certainly than Donald Trump is with his who he chooses to spend his time with and how. Why they might support him still is because he has delivered on the court. That animate more participation, statistically significant more participation in November by Republicans who may have been sitting on their thumbs in I live in a district in Virginia that is the candidates are an establishment type Republican and a challenging Democrat. And I called that Democrat's office today to ask if they had a position on whether or not they would support impeachment proceedings against Judge Kavanaugh. And I got a "we'll call you back" answer. So I don't have the sense that lots of other people were asking that question, but I thought it was curious. Are Republicans going to rally around this issue and turn out in greater numbers in November because of it?
Yes. Just yes.
Okay.
People are fired up.
I think it kind of depends on how people are feeling. I find that disgust breeds apathy, whereas anger breeds action. So it really depends. Are people feeling more disgusted with either the party that they would traditionally vote for or the opposition on this side, or are they more angry? And I think possibly the Democrats have shot themselves in the foot with the Kavanaugh proceedings. It was a hideous display of partisanship, and whatever the situation with Kavanaugh, they should be better than they were. They should just be far better. So if this has angered people against the Democrats, then you might see a bit of a swing to the Republicans. Or if it's disgusted them with the Democrats, you might see that the numbers just don't come out for it. I would suggest that it's apathy that we're going to see from Democrats in November.
Okay, I'm sorry, Graham, did you want to weigh in? Please, go ahead.
I was just going to add in that the one factor as well that the Democrats have really got to concern themselves with now is how they made independents feel about this whole situation. And I actually think that in the midterms, the I think the Republicans are going to come away with a much larger share of the independent vote than they otherwise would have got.
Well, we're only now, I'm trying to think of how many months we are away from the first Democrat primary presidential debate, and it's not many months. Where does that leave us with that? I mean, has Avenatti, do you think he's going to be a contender here? Is he going to be a player? Is it Warren? Has the Kavanaugh sort of debacle changed that math for anybody? What do you see going forward? Who's the front runner, and where is the challenge to Trump going to come? I see Mr. Angelides, managing editor of LibertyNation.com, with his hand in the air, calling him last. Sarah, what do you say? No, I'm kidding. Mark, go ahead.
Right. I have a quick question. Is Avenatti from California?
He currently, his principal residence, as I understand it, is in California. I think he's from Ohio. He went to school in Pennsylvania and then D.C. For law school. So he's current Californian.
Then there is a chance that he'll be in the final running, because I believe the California Democrats moved their primaries to earlier in the year, didn't they? Which would help them sweep up a lot more of the funds that come.
California's pretty early. I think they're in February. It's pretty early.
Yeah, it changed last year, I believe.
Well, Kamala Harris is presumably going to be, if she can get it together by then, she certainly wants to be president. Now, whether she can generate the backing and the fundraising in order to make it happen, along with some of her colleagues on that Judiciary Subcommittee. So
I see nobody except Californians will be in there. On the final.
Avenatti has never won a race for dog catcher, as far as I understand. He's very smart and very capable, and certainly has proven his mettle as a convincer in front of numerous juries, but he's never won a race. And Kamala Harris has won multiple statewide races for Attorney General, I think, and also for U.S. Senate. So we're a betting person.
Well, and I think
Donald Trump didn't win a race before either.
That's
compared
true.
to Hillary Clinton, who had won.
And you're looking at a similar situation. I think with Trump in 2016, he came on stage, blasted. The conservatives fell in love with the guy because he was outspoken and ready to go. But there were 17 people in the field. The Democrats had a handful that was quickly weeded down to 2, and of course, blasted through by 1. That's the same thing. We're just repeating it in a mirror image here. The Democrats are going to have just everybody running for president from everywhere. And the Republicans will have their guy. He's the incumbent. So I think you're going to see just a mirror image of that event.
Well, I'll tell you what, if that happens, I actually like Avenatti's chances better, because in a field that wide, just like with Trump, the person who will say the sort of outrageous thing, who can make a lot of hay, they're the ones that are going to get the attention. It's not the Swampies. It's going to be the outside guy, the dark horse. And Avenatti has made a career out of generating media attention for himself and his clients, I say that again, himself and his clients. So he's quite good. He's quite good at it. He's a pro player in that regard, to be sure. Okay, well, let's just keep it on the single topic, I guess, then, rather than mux it up with Nikki Haley and international relations. Graham, do you want to weigh in on any of that prognostication for Democrat primary goings on?
Sure. Well, I think Avenatti has 2 chances of being the Democratic nominee, slim and none. I don't think anyone takes him seriously. I certainly don't. I think basically I personally believe the ultimate fight for the Democratic nomination is going to end up coming down to Bernie Sanders versus Kamala Harris versus Sherrod Brown.
Okay, there you have it from Graham Noble. I'll finish with one exit question for Graham, who says not to take Avenatti seriously. Did you take Donald Trump seriously before he won the Republican nomination? His candidacy?
To be honest, not very seriously. Okay. But when it comes to taking people seriously, Avenatti is on a whole different level.
Okay.
I won money on Donald Trump, by the way, from the very start.
But that was a good question.
I called it.
We do not encourage wagering on the elections as an official matter.
I'm in England.
That's right.
Political gambling.
In England, managing editor Mark Angelides, Graham J. Noble, political correspondent, national correspondent Sarah Cowgill for LibertyNation.com. This is Scott Cosenza. Please like, comment, and subscribe. It really does help us out. Thank you so much for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.
Visit us at LibertyNation.com.